Just this week, the government held its last ministerial review retreat with a look at the 9 priority areas. But what a lot of Nigerians will easily use to judge this government is naturally their current reality. Take, for example, those displaced as a result of the floods. Could the government have done more at various levels? Well, tonight we'll be speaking with a man who knows well, but what exactly is going on with the floods in this government? He's a minister. The Minister of Water Resources joins us tonight from Abuja. Mr. Suleiman Adamu is our next guest. Thank you so much, Honorable Minister, for joining us on Politics Today.
Thank you. Good evening.
Well, just before we talk about the floods, I recall that around this time, 2 years ago, incidentally, you were on this program and you were discussing the EndSARS protests and the aftermath. Amnesty International today said that 2 years after the EndSARS protests, over 40 protesters are still languishing in prisons across Nigeria, while panels set up to investigate police impunity have failed to deliver justice to victims of police brutality. Then you said that people were being unfair to the president. Would you say that the government has been fair to them in the days, weeks, years after the protests?
Well, let me say that Amnesty International has lost all credibility to speak about this because of all the false narratives, false stories that they spewed during that time. It was clear from all that there was a lot of fake news, and Amnesty International was ready to telecast all that story around the world, which turned out not to be true. But coming back to the issue, I think the president came out to make a statement at that time, and the president has kept faith with all the things that he said. He asked the protesters to go back to their homes. SARS was disbanded, and to the best of my knowledge, reforms have been going on as promised by Mr. President of the police force. To a large extent, I'm sure many people will attest to the fact that the police have been behaving well. So I don't think there has been anything that the government has not done. The president has kept his promises, and I'll stick to that.
Right. So some of the demands that are still put forward, and it's important to just be on the same page with Nigerians. The demands include the freeing of all incarcerated over the EndSARS and compensation by the state for essentially jailing them unjustly, they say. Second is adequate compensation for people who were wounded and families of people killed. Third is full implementation of reports of judicial panels of inquiry. The fourth is open trial of security personnel who were found culpable in the event. And then the full implementation of the 5-for-5 demands. If you were to rate government in its performance in these 5 demands that were put forward yet again today, what percentage would you rate this government?
Well, I can't do that. I'm neither the Minister of Police Affairs nor the Minister of Interior. I think they are in the best position to answer this question. But what I can tell you is that Mr. President has kept faith with what he promised, and I'm sure that a lot has been going on in that respect. It's not for me to rate it. Some specific actions have been taken. I'm very sure of that. But also bear in mind that you need to look at the Constitution, what the constitutionality of some of the things that you are mentioning were supposed to have been done at state level, where the governors are the chief security officers of the state in their domains. Secondly, it's not enough to put a blanket statement that release people from jail and so on and so forth. There are people, what would you say to those that killed policemen, burnt by police barracks, took away armories, arms and ammunition from police stations, released prisoners? Those ones have to face the long arm of the law. So there are people, yes, okay, they had peaceful protests. Those people, if they were incarcerated, or should have been freed, and I don't have any reason to believe that there are such people that are still incarcerated. But those that broke the law, those that looted and killed armed policemen and armed soldiers, what have you, those that committed serious crimes ought to also face the full course of justice.
Let's wind down with this one, because I think largely this is geared towards building our nation, ensuring we have a better Nigeria we can be proud of, home and abroad. What key lesson would you say that, we should have taken away from this and imbibe as a nation, as a government, as a people?
Well, that government listens. There were legitimate reasons, and our government listened to those reasons, and I hope future governments will also listen to legitimate protests. But also to say that you can protest peacefully and still be heard, and not to take law into your arms. And I think into your hands rather. I think going forward, this is the lesson that we should take, and that governments should always be ready to listen to legitimate protests and agitations, as was done in this case. And credit should be given to this administration for really having listened and taking the necessary steps to address the situation.
All right. So let's get into the other big one, the floods. By way of an update to Nigerians, as we speak, what is the current situation of the flooding in Nigeria?
Well, the floods are receding because, of course, the rainy season is waning. This year's rains have been unprecedented. Yesterday, one of my officers was telling me that the rainfall in the northeast was 4 times above the normal average. We all know that. We've been seeing the rains every day. So they are receding, and what we'll be dealing with now is the aftermath of that situation. Like I said, the rains have been unprecedented. We always, on an annual basis, come out to, I personally, for 7 years running, I've been unveiling the annual flood outlook, advising states, local governments, and communities on the potential areas that are to be flooded, and also provide advisory on how to avoid, the devastating effect of the floods, a kind of early warning system. But in some cases, this have not been heeded. But at the same time, the annual flood outlooks, like I said, can only give you early warning, but it's almost next to impossible to predict the intensity of what the floods will look like. And this year, honestly, it's been a terrible one, and our hearts go to all the victims of these floods. And I personally also joined the government and President Muhammadu Buhari in offering our condolences to the victims.
Seeing those images, seeing this, the fate and the situation of the people who have been affected, really heart-wrenching. I haven't done an assessment, and I imagine you do this from time to time. What percentage of Nigeria would you say is still flooded, underwater, as it were, at this point?
Many areas. You see, I think the focus has always been on the Niger and Benue Basin. But believe me, in the hinterlands, it has also been very, very bad. Especially the northeast axis of Kano, Jigawa, Yobe, axis of Borno. And in fact, I also noticed today that a state of emergency has been declared in Chad because of these floods. So it's been everywhere. The most heart-wrenching thing, apart from the loss of lives and property, is also the fact that many farmlands have been submerged, right, and infrastructure damage. Roads have been cut off, and so on and so forth. So it's basically the entire country that has been affected.
Okay, so if you were to put a figure to it, would you say maybe 50% of the country flooded, 60%?
We are doing an assessment. We are doing an assessment jointly between my ministry and the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, Disaster Management and Social Development, as well as the Ministry of Health, to deal with the health component. So by the end of this week, I'm sure we'll have a full picture of a combination of the situation. But we have satellite maps to help us determine the extent, but we need our data to be correlated and synchronized between the various, including the National Emergency Management Agency. So we need to put all this together so that we have one comprehensive report to be able to tell you exactly what is the situation.
Well,
but
Honorable Minister,
I'm sure a substantial part of the country has been inundated.
This loss, this flooding, Honorable Minister, the flooding, the loss of lives and property, the displacement of people, for you, is it simply a natural disaster or lack of proper planning?
The floods, it's a combination of many things. First and foremost, of course there's natural disaster, like earthquake and other things, and everybody must accept that certain things, there's an act of God, but there's also a human aspect to it. For instance, one particular thing I would say is that for hundreds of years, or well, decades, let me not exaggerate, we have been bastardizing our watersheds, we've been deforesting our lands, we have been degrading the soil. That is one aspect. Secondly, many Nigerians just refuse to be law-abiding. They build on water courses. They block drains and water channels. So many activities that are being done. Yes, and of course, I will accept that also there are certain strategies that ought to be taken, maybe engineering solutions that over a long period of time have not been addressed. But that is also because of probably because of the nature and the level of our economy. Water resources management is a very, very expensive venture. Right. It is a time-consuming venture. You want to, even the studies alone take years to be completed. So it's a combination of so many issues, really.
Right. So neighboring Chad, for example, where there's been events of flooding affecting 1 million people, recently declared a state of emergency. Here in Nigeria, it's affected close to 2 million people, hundreds dead and displaced. Why have we not declared a state of emergency?
Well, it's certainly an emergency situation. What do you mean by it? It all depends on what you mean by declaration of state of emergency. We have not reached a situation, in my view, where the relevant emergency management authorities are not being able to deal with this situation. I'm not aware that has happened. We have governments, we have federal government, we have state governments, we have state emergency management agencies and the federal emergency agency. And I think they have not in any way said that what they've been doing, they've been overwhelmed by it. Chad is a very small country, and a very small territory where people are living. The vast of the land in Chad is desert. So I mean, the intensity, I mean, the effect it might have on the people and their level of preparedness and ability to cope with the emergency situation certainly is nowhere near what Nigeria can do. So I'm sure if this situation was beyond our capacity, certainly whatever the state of emergency or whatever that may encompass would have been declared in the country.
All right. You were also quoted as saying that the Lagdo Dam is responsible for just 1% of the flood, while 80% is water from the rains, what you described as blessings from above. So what is responsible for the rest 19%?
Well, I will reiterate that, yes, Lagdo Dam plays a very little role, not very significant role in the floods in this country. Our transboundary waters are rivers Niger and Benue. Lagdo Dam discharges into the river Benue. The river Benue, river Niger, and the Lake Chad. And I can tell you with all confidence that only these transboundary waters contribute only 20% to the freshwater resources in this country, coming into the country. The remaining 80% is generated within the country from rains and drains either to the northeast or comes into the Benue and Niger basins. So that is the situation. What we have is, if you look at River Niger, it is fairly damped. We have we have Kainji, we have Jeba, we have Shiroro, and now Zungeru coming. So on the tributaries that bring water into the River Niger. But on the Benue axis, I think apart from River Gongola that has two dams, Dadinkoa and Kiri Dam, and until recently also the Kashimbila Dam, which we completed in 2017, the tributaries, there are so many tributaries of the River Benue coming from the Benue, from the Mambila Highlands that need to be harnessed as well. Yes, and dams, yes, can check flood for a little, but when rains like the ones we have this year are so unprecedented, it reaches a point, once the dam reaches its full supply level, you also have to release the water to drain back into the rivers. So it can be a temporary solution, but at the end of the day, I think the most important thing is that we need to check our watersheds. We need to do land management effectively so that we can restore our soil and reduce the degradation. Because primarily what is happening, in addition to the absence of those dams on River Benue axis, is the fact that our rivers are silted up because of erosion, and their carrying capacity to take runoff across the country has been completely lost. Besides that, we need to look also at our town planning rules also we need to abide by our town planning regulations.
All right, so as we wind down, there are fears about whether or not this is the worst of it. There talks about the Oyon Dam, for example, that feeds into Ogun and River. People wondering, is there something coming up in that area? Some say, well, this is global warming, essentially. It's climate change. I mean, expect it, all of that. So let's wind down with this. What is the direction for the government now to ensure that this is the worst that we'll see and this perhaps will be the last of it?
I'm afraid to say that we cannot predict that this is the worst flood that worst rainfall that we can get. Climate change and nature works in mysterious ways. But what we need to do is to continue to be alert. We'll continue to give early warning systems. But in the long run, there are some long-term solutions, or no, I wouldn't say solutions, but measures that can alleviate some of this problem, especially on the rivers Niger and Benue. We are working, trying to develop a water resource, a master plan for rivers Niger and Benue that would involve what we call in engineering river training, that can alleviate some of the flood. But this is a long-term measure. The study alone will take at least minimum of 3 years. And we're already working on that. We've been working on that since I came into office.
Well, we have to wind down at this point. Lots of worries for a lot of Nigerians who are affected by this. But clearly it's an ongoing conversation, and we do hope to get more views from you as to the updates in the coming days. But I would like to thank you so much, the Honorable Minister of Water Resources, Mr. Suleiman Adamu, for your time on the program tonight.
Thank you, and have a good evening.